Hey guys, tonight we will step into the magnificent heart of Versailles, where the candlelight shimmering on the marble of 1682 still echoes stories of power and opulence. The moment Louis XIV donned his crimson velvet cloak, the entire court held its breath, awaiting secrets never before revealed. If you think you can remain unfazed by the dark corners and bizarre details hidden behind the velvet drapes, I think again. Especially fact number 55, which will keep your eyes glued to this video. So, before we embark on our journey, take a second to hit like and subscribe, but only if you are truly excited to explore. I have compiled 101 facts from many different sources. Some are entirely true. Some are legendary anecdotes. And I want to hear your thoughts which facts are the truth, and which are merely rumors. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, what time it is there, and which item in this list resonated most with you. Now, dim the lights, let the harpsichord concerto guide us, and together, let's uncover 101 shocking and weird facts about Louis XIV, the Sun King, whom they both admired and feared. Truth 1. Born on the 5th of September in the year 1638. Louis XIV was from the very moment of his birth recognized as an emblem of power. 5 days later, his baptism was conducted with great ceremony, presided over by a single godmother, his grandmother, Marie de Medici, a formidable woman unafraid to overshadow the entire court. The image of a 4-year-old child, newly crowned by the weight of the throne, he was already prophesied to eclipse all former crowns. From the instant the holy water trickled across his brow, Louis XIV was marked as the supreme symbol of authority, the necessary condition for his extraordinary ambitions to follow. Truth 2. An official proclamation marked his accession at the age of 4, but it was not until the age of 23 that Louis XIV truly revealed his personal mettle. Prior to that, political maneuvers and backstage intrigues were orchestrated by close advisors such as the Duke of Mazarin, while he remained but a puppet in the hands of power. Upon turning 23, the king tore aside the veil and seized every decision himself, proving who truly wielded the scepter. That transfer of power was more than ritual. It was a steel-clad drama in which Louis XIV formally declared war on any force daring to challenge his throne. Truth 3. L'état. C'est moi. The state that is me, though no contemporary document records him uttering those exact words. It became the immortal maxim linked to his name. It was not an empty phrase, but a public challenge to any prince or noble who fancied sharing authority. When historians invoke this declaration, they care less about its literal authenticity and more about its indomitable spirit under the reign of Louis XIV. Royal power was absolute, and no one stood outside its rule. Truth 4. To assert his divine right, Louis XIV chose the sun as his personal emblem, thus earning the title Sun King. From childhood, he was depicted at court ballets, in portrait, and on sculpted reliefs radiating an aura that bathed the entire palace. The sun signified the eternal and the universal center toward which all things gravitated in adopting it. Louis XIV emphasized that only he alone governed every facet of existence. Truth 5. A seemingly trivial detail, his height became a tool to reinforce his authority. Standing at approximately 1.73 meters tall, Louis XIV prompted many courtiers to complain that they had to augment their shoe heels just to meet his gaze. Every pair of elevated shoes he donned was not merely a fashion statement, but a declaration. They must bow and look upward to behold the true sovereign. This simple fact starkly reveals his meticulous, centimeter-by-centimeter calculation in manipulating the court. Truth 6. Louis XIV did not merely patronize the ballet, he was its star. From a young age, he threw himself into the art of dance with unbridled zeal, mastering intricate footwork and dramatic poses that even seasoned courtiers envied. In the year 1653, at the tender age of 15, he famously assumed the role of Apollo, god of the sun, in a court performance that blurred the line between monarch and myth. Draped in golden silk, crown of rays upon his brow, he embodied the very emblem he would later adopt as Sun King. That night, the palace trembled with applause. Nobles wiped tears of awe from their eyes, recognizing that their sovereign was no distant figurehead, but a living deity commanding both stage and state. Truth 7. If power could be measured by footwear, Louis XIV ruled supreme. He amassed over 70 pairs of high-heeled shoes, each a statement of absolute authority. Many were gilded in gold leaf, others encrusted with gems, all designed to elevate his stature, literally and figuratively, above every courtier in attendance. These heels did more than add inches. They forced every onlooker to bow their heads and crane their necks to meet his gaze. When he entered a room, the click of his heels announced the arrival of someone whose very steps defined the rhythm of Versailles. The sheer extravagance of his collection spoke volumes under his reign. Luxury was weaponized, and fashion became a tool of dominance. Truth 8. Versailles began life as a modest hunting lodge, a wooden retreat tucked amidst the forests of Ile-de-France. When Louis XIV first arrived there in 1661, he saw potential for something far grander. Over the next 2 decades, craftsmen and laborers toiled under his exacting command, transforming that humble lodge into the grandest palace Europe had ever seen. By the year 1682, Versailles sprawled across more than 8,000 hectares, boasting sprawling gardens, mirrored halls, and fountains that danced to the king's will. Walls of carved marble rose where timber once stood, corridors twice the length of Notre Dame's nave echoed with the footsteps of ministers and mandarins. The message was clear: Louis XIV would not be confined by precedent or practicality. He would build his kingdom from the ground up, brick by brick, reflecting his own boundless ambition. Truth 9. Life at Versailles was not guided by whim, but governed by ritual so precise it bordered on the mechanical. Each day followed a rigid schedule of lever, the sovereign's public waking. Then meals served as grand ceremonies. And finally coucher, the equally public ritual of retiring to bed. From dawn's first light to evening's hush. Every gesture, every conversation, every meal was performed on a stage, lit by thousands of candles. Courtiers vied for the honor of laying out his garments at lever, then stood frozen as he dressed, proving their loyalty through silent obedience. During coucher, all eyes watched as he undressed, each movement catalogued like scripture. These ceremonies did more than display royal routine. They reinforced the idea that Louis XIV was not merely a ruler, but the linchpin of France itself. No private moment existed. Everything was public theatre designed to remind every noble that their very purpose was to serve his will. Truth 10. Even the simplest act of dining was transformed into a statement of transparency and control. Louis XIV insisted that his private meals, those supposed to be taken behind closed doors, to be eaten in the full view of his courtiers. By exposing his table to watchful eyes, he erased any boundary between king and crowd, making his sustenance a communal spectacle. Each bite he took was observed, dissected, and recorded by officials whose sole task was to ensure no poison lurked in his food, and to remind every attendee that to dine in the king's presence was both privilege and peril. This uncompromising openness broadcast a message under his reign. Secrecy belonged to his adversaries alone. Transparency served as intimidation, and every crumb he consumed underscored a simple truth. Louis XIV held dominion not just over land and law, but even over the most intimate facets of his existence. Truth 11. In the gilded theatre of Versailles, privacy was a myth. Louis XIV's bedchamber featured balconies overlooking his private sanctum so that any subject granted access could witness the sovereign dressing and undressing. Imagine standing mere feet away as velvet robes slipped from a monarch's shoulders and linen shirts were fastened at the wrists, every movement exposed. This spectacle served a brutal purpose: to remind courtiers that they were forever under scrutiny. that even the most intimate rituals of the king were choreographed for their obedience. By stripping away the veil of privacy, Louis XIV reinforced the inescapable hierarchy. He observed them as they served, and they watched, powerless to hide. Truth 12. When Louis XIV threw a fête galante, he did not simply host a party, he staged an absolute demonstration of power. The palace lake transformed into a war zone for mock naval battles, complete with galleys painted in regal hues and musket flashes, reflecting off gilt-edged water. As fireworks erupted in patterns of fleur-de-lis overhead, orchestras played operas composed expressly for these soirees, with costumes dazzling enough to rival the sun itself. Guests, draped in silks, the colour of dawn, were swept into choreographed dances that blurred the boundary between ruler and subject. Each elaborate celebration proclaimed the monarch's wealth and taste were limitless, and to witness his grandeur was to acknowledge his dominion over both nature and artifice. Truth 13 protocol at Versailles was a labyrinth of gestures so intricate that, in the year 1701, an entire volume, Le Grand Couvert, was published to codify every nuance at the royal table. This manual specified which fork would touch which morsel, the precise angle at which a napkin must fold, and the exact cadence of conversation permitted between each course. A single misstep, a spoon raised too high, or a word uttered out of turn could signal disloyalty or ignorance. Through this codification, Louis XIV weaponized etiquette, transforming dining into a silent tournament where mastery of ceremony equaled proximity to the throne. Courtiers spent years memorizing Le Grand Couvert's page, ever wary that a breach of decorum might cost them favour or worse, a fall from grace. Truth 14. Beneath the opulence and pageantry lay an iron heart, Louis XIV's fierce jealousy of his younger brother Philippe. He slashed Philippe's allowance, ensuring it never approached the royal purse, and vetoed any advantageous marriage prospects that might elevate Philippe's status. By chaining his brother to modest fiefdoms and refusing alliances with powerful houses, Louis XIV isolated Philippe to prevent any rival claim to glory or affection. This fraternal rivalry revealed the king's essential doctrine: absolute power allowed for no equals, not in blood, not in wealth, and above all, not in ambition. Even familial bonds bowed to the supremacy of the son, king. Truth 15. The forest echoed with hoofbeats as Louis XIV, even in his advancing years, reclaimed his youthful vigour in pursuit of game. Hunting was not a pastime, but a sacred ritual, a rite through which he affirmed dominion over the natural world. No matter the aches of age or weight carried by his years of ceremony, he insisted on leading every royal hunt, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the underbrush. Courtiers, breathless in pursuit of their own quarry, watched the monarch stride ahead, unwavering. These expeditions served as a metaphor as he tracked deer and boar. He reminded France that the true hunt was for power itself, and he would chase it to the very end of his reign. Truth 16. To carve a paradise worthy of his rule, Louis XIV turned to the master gardener André Le Nôtre. Under their collaboration, the gardens of Versailles expanded to cover nearly 2,000 hectares, a masterpiece of geometry and horticulture. Parterres unfolded like embroidery on the earth. Fountains erupted in synchronized splendor, and hedges sculpted into mythic creatures lined the avenues. Each axis directed the eye and the imagination toward the palace's central pavilion, underscoring the monarch's role as the universe's pivot. By commanding nature itself to bend to his vision, Louis XIV communicated an unassailable message. His power extended from the heavens of his emblematic sun to the very soil beneath his subjects' feet. Truth 17. The garden's sun fountain was no mere decoration. It was a calculated marvel of optics and symbolism, precisely aligned with the palace's central windows. This grand jet of water caught the first rays of dawn and refracted them in a dazzling spectacle of light. At sunrise, the droplets sparkled like liquid gold, projecting beams across the marble floors of the Hall of Mirrors. This alignment was no accident, but a deliberate assertion as the sun rose each morning. So too did the glory of Louis XIV, reaffirmed in a daily ritual that bound nature's greatest luminary to his own divine image. Truth 18 Versailles' Grand Canal was conceived not for commerce or irrigation, but for personal indulgence, so that Louis XIV could glide across its waters like a Venetian doge. Spanning more than 1,400 meters in length and 80 meters in width, the canal accommodated gilded gondolas, complete with silk-draped pavilions and pearl-glass chandeliers, every weekend. The king would don a gilt-trimmed uniform, step into his private gondola, and preside over mock regattas, as courtiers paddled in formation behind him. By emulating the grandeur of Venice, he declared that no republic or maritime power could rival the magnificence of his own reign. Truth 19. To illuminate his vast palace, Louis XIV devoted a staggering sum, 1 million livres each year, to candles alone. Thousands of beeswax pillars were hand-poured in royal workshops, then polished and trimmed with gold leaf filigree. At dusk, thousands of courtiers and servants would light these candles in synchronized fashion, bathing every corridor, gallery, and chamber in a warm, opulent glow. The expense was astronomical, but the effect unmistakable. Versailles was transformed into a city of fire, a symbol of burning ambition and unwavering authority. Even the darkest corners were forced into submission by this relentless brilliance. Truth 20. The grandeur of court ceremonies came at a physical cost. Summer at Versailles was akin to standing beside a furnace, tucked into layers of silk and brocade. Courtiers endured, temperatures exceeding 30 degrees Celsius as thousands of candle flames, roaring hearths, and closely packed bodies generated searing heat. Episodes of mass fainting were common. Nobles collapsed mid-curtsy, diplomats toppled during toasts, and ladies in waiting swooned in anticipation of royal commands. Despite the risk, no one dared abandon their post. For absence from ceremony meant absence from favour, and possibly the king's wrath. Truth 21 Dampness threatened the palace's ornate decor, and mildew was a constant menace to tapestries and frescoes. In response, Louis XIV issued a daily decree. Bundles of freshly cut rosemary were to be burned throughout Versailles at dawn. The pungent smoke permeated every chamber, hallway, and staircase, creating a fragrant barrier against moisture. This ritual had the dual purpose of preserving art and asserting royal control over the very air his subjects breathed. Even the simplest herb became an instrument of courtly dominion. Truth 22. In the year 1659, under the terms of the Peace of the Pyrenees, Louis XIV married his second cousin, Marie-Thérèse of Spain. This dynastic union was less about love and more about cementing a hard-won peace with Spain after decades of war. Their marriage was choreographed as meticulously as any battlefield maneuver. Ambassadors watched every gesture, and emissaries recorded each word for posterity. Through this alliance, Louis XIV not only secured a diplomatic victory, but also reinforced his image as a sovereign whose personal life served the interests of state. Truth 23. Even the consummation of a royal marriage was staged for public consumption. On their wedding night, Marie-Thérèse's marriage bed, lavishly draped in crimson velvet and trimmed with gold, was rolled into the grand hall of Versailles. Hundreds of courtiers gathered to witness the bedding ceremony, a solemn ritual in which the new queen and king were formally united before the eyes of the realm. This act was more than tradition. It was a statement of transparency and a reminder that the hearth of monarchy was a spectacle owned by the state itself. Truth 24. Over the course of his reign, Louis XIV fathered 6 official children. Yet only one son survived infancy, known as Le Grand Dauphin. The loss of 5 heirs was a personal tragedy, but it also underscored the fragility of dynastic succession. Every birth was celebrated with cannon fire and court festivals. Yet the deaths of these little princes and princesses were met with public mourning. Their tiny coffins paraded through Versailles in solemn procession, In this way, the inherent vulnerability of human life was laid bare against the backdrop of absolute power, reminding all that even a sun king could not escape nature's darkest decree. Truth 25. In the gilded labyrinth of Versailles, discretion was a luxury reserved for the king alone. Louis XIV not only tolerated his parade of mistresses, but institutionalized their presence by commissioning lavish apartments for them within the palace walls. These quarters, complete with private salons, ornate bedchambers, and separate dining rooms, were constructed at the king's explicit order, ensuring his favourites could reside in comfort without compromising the rigid separation of court factions. Courtiers whispered that the very stones of Versailles bore witness to clandestine liaisons sanctioned by royal decree. By carving out these hidden enclaves, Louis XIV transformed adultery into an instrument of power, demonstrating that even morality could bend to the will of the Sun King. Truth 26. Among these women, one stood above the rest, Madame de Montespan. As the king's favourite mistress for many years, she wielded influence rivaling that of any duke or duchess. Yet her public role masked a private life marked by secrecy and strategy. Under the cover of night, she bore Louis XIV no fewer than 7 children, their births carefully concealed until each child could be declared legitimate and installed in the royal nursery. These secret offspring fortified Madame de Montespan's sway, for the Queen Mother's grandchildren were not only heirs to the throne, but living proof of her enduring favour. In this ruthless game of dynastic chess, childbirth became both weapon and shield, and Madame de Montespan emerged as a formidable player in the court's twin arenas of love and intrigue. Truth 27. Louis XIV's appetite for the arts extended beyond patronage and performance. He himself tried his hand at theatrical composition. Under a carefully selected pseudonym disguising his identity to avoid the scrutiny of jealous rivals, he penned several comedic plays. These works, brimming with witty dialogue and satirical jabs at noble foibles, never saw the stage. Their manuscripts confined to the private library of Sceaux, his secret authorship delighted a handful of confidants who recognized the royal hand in sharp turns of phrase. By moonlighting as a playwright, Louis XIV demonstrated that absolute authority need not forego personal indulgence. Yet he kept these literary experiments hidden, revealing them only to those he trusted most, and ensuring his creative impulses remained another facet of his inscrutable mystique. Truth 28. In the year 1670, Louis XIV made headlines beyond palace walls by issuing a royal edict banning coffee, a beverage he famously denounced as the bitter invention of Satan. He declared that no subject should consume the dark, steaming brew that had swept through Europe's salons and coffeehouses. Baristas faced fines and confiscation of their delicate wares, while merchants scrambled to comply. Yet this prohibition proved as futile as it was theatrical. Within months, the king reversed course, legalizing coffee once more, after pausing to observe its popularity and potential fiscal benefit through imposed duties. This brief flirtation with prohibition underscored Louis XIV's penchant for theatrical gestures. He could decree the unthinkable at dawn, only to retract it by dusk, keeping his subjects off balance and ever mindful of his capricious authority. Truth 29. To shield the palace's delicate plaster from the damp, Louis XIV introduced an innovation that married practicality with opulence: plaster of Paris wallpaper, crafted from finely milled gypsum, mixed with pigments and pressed into sheets. This novel wall, covering both, repelled moisture and displayed intricate relief patterns, arabesques, fleurs-de-lis, and scenes of mythic grandeur installed throughout Versailles. It protected frescoes and tapestries from mildew, while proclaiming French ingenuity to visiting dignitaries. The price was steep, reserved only for royal domains. Yet the result was undeniable: walls that gleamed like ivory under candlelight, impervious to the damp that plagued lesser manors. In this fusion of science and art, Louis XIV asserted that his reign would shelter greatness in every detail. Truth 30. Knowledge. Like power was a currency Louis XIV coveted. In 1666, he established the first French Academy of Sciences, a bold move to rival the scholarly institutions of Italy and England. He summoned mathematicians, astronomers, physicists, and engineers to convene under royal patronage, charging them to advance fields from cartography to hydraulics. These scholars received pensions, laboratories, and the king's favour privileges designed to cement France's reputation as the epicenter of Enlightenment thought. The Academy's publications flowed across Europe, positioning Versailles not only as a seat of political might, but as a font of scientific progress. Through this institution, Louis XIV ensured that his legacy would shine not only in marble and mirror, but in the annals of human discovery. Truth 31 Vanity was Louis XIV's silent canvas, and he painted himself into immortality, minus any hint of imperfection. He commissioned the celebrated portraitist Hyacinthe Rigaud to capture his likeness dozens of times. Each canvas, a masterclass in flattery. Before the king sat for any brushstroke, Rigaud received explicit instructions. Every double chin, every crease around the jawline must vanish. Thus, when Versailles halls filled with these grand portraits, Louis XIV in sumptuous robes, sceptre in hand, gaze unflinching, no subject could question the sovereign's divine bearing. These images were not mere art, they were propaganda etched in oil, a visual decree that the Sun King possessed neither flaw nor doubt. Truth 32 under Louis XIV. Natural hair became an act of rebellion. He forbade courtiers from wearing their own long locks, decreeing that only elaborate wigs were acceptable at court. Men who dared flaunt unbound tresses risked censure or exclusion from royal ceremonies. In this edict, he weaponized fashion as a test of loyalty compliance, proved submission to his tastes, and defiance marked one as an outsider. By casting himself as arbiter of appearance, Louis XIV extended his dominion from policy to personal style, ensuring that every nobleman who approached his inner circle did so under the shadow of his whims. Truth 33. These wigs were not mere toupees. They were status symbols carved from horsehair, human hair, and powdered to a ghostly white. Some weighed over 2 kilograms and required hours of skilled hands to shape into cascading curls and intricate braids. Courtiers endured the burden, not out of masochism, but necessity. Only the well-coiffed could claim proximity to the throne. Each morning, armies of hairdressers laboured beside heated irons and scented pomades to achieve the perfect wave. The final result was an architectural marvel atop the head, a towering display of wealth and obedience. In a society where clothing spoke volumes, wig weight measured one's devotion to the sun. King's aesthetic, Truth 34. Behind every immaculate shave and powdered brow stood Louis XIV's exclusive barber, an artisan granted unrivaled privilege. No common barber could approach the king. Only this singular professional served the royal family, tasked with a fortnightly ritual. The barber shaved the monarch every other day, wielding razors honed to surgical precision. Each stroke required both speed and discretion. A nick in the king's skin would have been unthinkable. These sessions were private audiences in miniature, where whispers of policy and court gossip flowed as easily as lather across a velvet bowl. Through the simple act of grooming, Louis XIV underscored that even his beard's edge bowed to monarchical perfection. Truth 35 mirrors were weapons in disguise, tools that could betray state secrets if left unattended. To prevent any reflection of confidential documents or private counsel, Louis XIV insisted that all mirrors be smashed the moment he vacated a room. Servants, armed with hammers, dashed in at his departure, shattering polished glass into splinters. Only after courtiers had cleared away the fragments and reinstalled new glass could the king return. This ritual of destruction and renewal served as a stark reminder under his reign. Transparency existed only on his terms, and secrecy belonged to the sovereign alone. No reflection could outlast his will. Truth. 36. Louis XIV's passion for luxury extended beyond portraits and powder into a wardrobe that defied imagination. He owned more than 5,000 individual garments, robes, coats, waistcoat, breeches, vests, and capes, each fabricated from the finest silks, velvets, and brocades. Every item carried its own inventory number and label, catalogued by court clerks who tracked wear and repair. Nearly every dawn saw him don a different ensemble, a choreographed statement of supremacy that left courtiers scrambling to match his extravagance. In a realm where textiles symbolized power, his endless closet proclaimed one irrefutable fact: absolute monarchy meant inexhaustible resources, and no expense was too great to affirm his dominion. Truth. 37. In a court bursting with ambassadors, envoys, and nobles from every corner of Europe, Louis XIV ensured that even his wardrobe spoke the language of power. Every garment, be it a crimson mantle or a gilded doublet, was meticulously labelled in French, Latin, and Italian. These trilingual tags did more than prevent mistakes. They proclaimed the king's dominion over tongues and territories alike. When a Portuguese envoy slipped into a satin coat inscribed in Italian, he was forced to acknowledge Versailles as the nexus of culture and command. Through this simple act of labelling, Louis XIV bound every courtier, regardless of birth, to the same unyielding standard served the Sun King in any tongue he chose. Truth. 38. Cosmetics at Versailles were no frivolous adornment but instruments of courtly warfare. Louis XIV recruited women courtiers, skilled in the art of powdered elegance, to apply his makeup each dawn. They sculpted his visage to a strict regimen, a face as pale as moonlight, cheeks flushed with the subtlest rouge, and a single beauty patch placed just so to accentuate his jawline. These ritualistic applications were not about vanity alone. They were visual armor, crafting an image so perfect that no rival could find a flaw. By outsourcing his complexion to trusted ladies of the chamber, Louis XIV made every brushstroke an affirmation of his unassailable mystique. Truth. 39. While other monarchs collected lands or titles, Louis XIV amassed creatures of the wild to decorate his domain. His personal menagerie boasted monkeys leaping through gilded cages, parrots screeching courtly phrases, and peacocks strutting across manicured lawns. At the height of extravagance, a ring-tailed lemur arrived from Madagascar, a creature so alien that courtiers whispered of sorcery. Each exotic pet served as living evidence of France's reach, a tangible sign that the world itself was his to command. These animals, far from mere curiosities, reinforced the monarch's message: if land, law, and language bent to his will, even nature's most distant marvels answered to Louis XIV. Truth. 40. Discipline at Versailles extended to the very air courtiers breathed. Louis XIV issued an edict banning spitting in palace corridors, a tiny offence, perhaps, yet one that struck at the heart of decorum. Fines were imposed on any offender. A thief might walk free, but a noble who dared expectorate faced a purse lighter by royal decree. This prohibition was not about cleanliness alone. It was a demonstration of absolute control, in which the king's will reached into the most instinctive bodily functions. By criminalizing spitting, Louis XIV reminded every subject that beneath the splendor of silk and gold, order and obedience reigned supreme. Truth. 41. Culture was a crown jewel in Louis XIV's reign, and he invested his own fortune to build the Opera Royal at Versailles. This magnificent house, seating more than 800 guests, rose within the palace grounds, its walls echoing with the strains of court musicians. No state funds tarnished its gilt columns or frescoed ceilings. The Sun King bankrolled every stone and chandelier from his private coffers. In doing so, he declared that patronage was not charity but prerogative as sovereign. He alone determined which art endured. When the curtain rose on opening night, it was not merely a performance, but a testament to one man's determination to rule both stage and state. Truth 42. Yet Louis XIV's role in opera did not end with construction. He became its most exacting critic. He attended rehearsals in person, scrutinizing each note, each gesture, each pause. A musician's flourish that failed to capture his vision was met with immediate revision. A dancer's step out of sync invited correction. His commands reached into the smallest minutiae, the angle of an arm, to the duration of a pause, until the performance mirrored his idea of perfection. Through this relentless oversight, he transformed the Opera Royal into an extension of his sovereignty, a place where artistic expression bent to the sun, king's exacting standard. Truth 43. In the year 1674, Louis XIV extended his rule into the realm of invention, establishing France's first patent system. This bold decree granted inventors exclusive rights to their creations, incentivizing innovation from Paris to Provence. No longer would craftsmen see their designs pilfered. Instead, they received royal protection and reward. By monopolizing the very concept of novelty, the king harnessed the engine of progress for state purposes. French engineers, architects, and artisans found in Versailles not just patronage but legal armor. In forging this patent system, Louis XIV ensured that the fires of invention would burn under his vigilant gaze, fueling the brilliance of France for generations to come. Truth 44. Under Louis XIV's iron-fisted reign, Jean-Baptiste Colbert rose as finance minister and unleashed mercantilism with brutal efficiency. Colbert slapped tariffs on imports, subsidized textile manufacturing, and flooded markets with French silk, glass, and porcelain. Every boat that sailed from Le Havre and Bordeaux carried goods stamped with the fleur-de-lis, filling state coffers to bursting. Exports soared, customs revenues multiplied, yet this rigid system served one master alone, the king. Through Colbert's mercantilist machine, Louis XIV harnessed commerce as a weapon of statecraft, ensuring France's wealth bolstered his limitless ambitions. Truth 45. Louis XIV's appetite for conquest was devouring the kingdom's treasure, his relentless wars first against the Dutch Republic, then against Spain, and finally against a sweeping European Grand Alliance, drained France's resources beyond measure. Armies marched under the regimental colours of the Sun King. Cannons roared at Blenheim, Neerwinden, and countless other fields. Yet the cost of these campaigns exceeded France's annual revenue, forcing the crown into desperate straits. As taxes climbed and peasants groaned under the yoke, Louis XIV pressed on, convinced that glory on the battlefield justified the ruin of his own realm. Truth 46. To sustain his martial ventures, Louis XIV resorted to the alchemy of debasing the currency. Silver coins were clipped, gold content reduced, and base metals mixed into mint stocks. At first, the appearance of abundant coinage masked the betrayal. Merchants flocked to exchange old crowns for new issues. But soon, rampant inflation set in, bread price doubled, wages stagnated, and riots flared in provincial towns. The populace discovered that wealth printed by royal decree was as hollow as the promises of victory. In debasing the realm's money, Louis XIV revealed the peril of funding his dreams at the expense of his people's survival. Truth 47. Recognizing that power depended on walls as much as on armies, Louis XIV commissioned Sébastien Leprestre de Vauban to erect fortresses across France's borders. Vauban's designed star-shaped bastion, angled ramparts, and covered ways redefined military engineering. From Neuf-Brisach to Mont-Dauphin, these citadels stood as silent sentinels, daring any foe to breach French soil. Each fortress was a monument to order and discipline, its geometry reflecting the king's own precision. Through Vauban's ramparts, Louis XIV fortified his realm, making invasion a perilous gamble for those who dared challenge his supremacy. Truth 48. Yet Louis XIV would not trust distance to guarantee defense. He personally inspected every new fortress site, mounting his destrier and riding hundreds of kilometers across rugged terrain. Beneath ornate armor, he measured rampart angles, surveyed artillery positions, and quizzed engineers on drainage and garrison capacities. Accompanied by aides and scribes, he transformed each inspection into a display of sovereign command. No report summoned to Versailles matched the weight of his own presence. Through these journeys, Louis XIV broadcast a simple truth even in matters of war. He would master details that others merely delegated. Truth 49 death loomed at his cradle when smallpox struck the young Dauphin in his infancy. Yet against the odds, Louis XIV survived the scourge that claimed many of his contemporaries. His immunity thereafter became a silent safeguard, preserving the continuity of his reign when plague, measles, and other epidemics stalked Europe. While physicians tended to court infections with leeches and potions, the king's scarred skin stood as testament to resilience. Surviving smallpox was not mere luck, but destiny's decree France's luminary must endure. Unbroken, as the light of absolute monarchy, truth 50 conscious, that disease threatened the inner sanctum. Louis XIV introduced medical inspections for every member of the royal household. Physicians boarded at Versailles, performing daily health checks on cooks, footmen, equerries, and ladies in waiting. Wounds were cleansed, fever diagnosed, and contagion stamped out before it could reach the monarch's person. This unprecedented protocol transformed Versailles into a quasi-clinic where even the lowliest valet submitted to examinations. In wielding medicine as a tool of preservation, Louis XIV demonstrated that his dominion extended not only over land and law, but also over the very bodies that served at his pleasure. Truth 51 Louis XIV possessed a palate as discerning as his taste for splendor. He championed the rise of petits fours in France, transforming these dainty pastries into the pinnacle of dessert artistry. Confectioners were summoned to Versailles and instructed to fashion bite-sized marvels, delicate almond cakes, jam-filled biscuits, and glazed morsels, so exquisite that courtiers traded favors for a single bite. Under his patronage, petits fours ceased to be mere after-dinner trifles and became the crowning glory of every banquet. With each silken crumb, Louis XIV demonstrated that true power could be conveyed in the most refined of pleasures. Truth 52 Hygiene at the Sun. King's court leapt forward when Louis XIV decreed the installation of the first genuine bathtubs at Versailles. No longer satisfied with sponge and basin rituals, he insisted on marble-lined tubs filled with heated water for daily immersion. These baths, complete with gilded fixtures and perfumed oils, set a new standard in royal comfort. Courtiers, once disdainful of water, now queued to emulate their sovereign's commitment to cleanliness. By elevating bathing to an act of regal necessity, Louis XIV proved that even the grandest monarch could and should embrace modern advancement in personal care. Truth 53 Attendance at court was non-negotiable. Louis XIV issued a stern edict. Any courtier who neglected to appear at 3 consecutive ceremonies, be it the morning lever, midday council, or evening coucher, would be declared neglected and barred from all future functions. No excuse, no plea, no petition could reverse this judgment. The threat of exclusion propelled even the most influential nobles to scramble for their places in the king's presence. Through this ironclad rule, the Sun King ensured that loyalty was not passive, but actively displayed, reinforcing his unchallenged primacy over every subject in his realm. Truth 54. In a stroke of linguistic brilliance, Louis XIV proclaimed that all international treaties must be drafted in French. Recognizing that language was the ultimate claim to authority, he elevated French above Latin, Spanish, and German. Ambassadors from the Ottoman Porte to the courts of Vienna and Berlin found themselves compelled to negotiate in his tongue or rely on translators loyal to Versailles. This edict did more than standardize diplomacy. It enshrined France's cultural supremacy across Europe. With each treaty penned in French, Louis XIV forged bonds of state that resonated with his voice, ensuring his realm's influence radiated through every written accord. Truth 55, mastery of tongues, was yet another weapon in Louis XIV's arsenal. He spoke 6 languages: French, Latin, Italian, Spanish, German, and Occitan with the fluency of a seasoned scholar. This polyglot prowess allowed him to address foreign envoys without the filter of interpreters, conveying nuance and command in every syllable. When he switched seamlessly from Latin to Italian, or from Spanish to German, he demonstrated that no court could rival his erudition. His multilingual facility not only facilitated negotiations, but also signaled to all Europe that the Sun King's intellect shone as brightly as his emblematic star. Truth 56. In the year 1631, Louis XIV commissioned the Gazette de France, Europe's inaugural weekly newspaper, to wield information as deftly as any sword. Under his decree, royal censors and scribes captured court proclamations, military dispatches, and colonial ventures in disciplined print, ensuring that news once whispered in salons or shouted in marketplaces flowed in a steady stream sanctioned by Versailles. This ingenious move placed the king at the helm of France's public discourse, allowing him to shape opinion before rumours could take root. With each issue, Louis XIV demonstrated that controlling the narrative was as vital to sovereignty as armies or fortresses. Truth 57. The blade of honour nearly struck too close to home when Louis's own brother, Philippe, almost perished in a duel in 1643. Witnessing this near tragedy, the Sun King delivered a ruthless verdict. Dueling was outlawed throughout the realm. No courtier, regardless of rank or grievance, could settle disputes with pistols or rapier. Offenders faced exile or imprisonment, a stark warning that personal vendettas threatened the fragile stability of his rule. By crushing the duel's code of honour, Louis XIV asserted that only he held the right to judge and punish, extinguishing any flicker of private justice that might challenge his absolute authority. Truth 58. To guard the sanctity of his name, Louis XIV employed a cadre of murmurers, linguistic enforcers, stationed at the palace doors. These appointed agents corrected every mispronunciation of Louis XIV, stepping forward with whispered corrections whenever a courtier faltered. Whether in French salons or German embassies, no voice escaped their vigilance. This seemingly trivial oversight masked a ferocious demand for respect. To speak the king's name imperfectly was to undermine the Sun King's grandeur. Through these silent sentinels of speech, Louis XIV extended his dominion into the most intimate act of address, ensuring that loquacity itself bowed to his supremacy. Truth 59. On the 1st of September in the year 1715, Louis XIV breathed his last merely 4 days before what would have been his 77th birthday. As he lay upon the state bed within the Hall of Mirrors, courtiers gathered in hushed awe around the sovereign whose life had defined an era. His passing marked the end of a reign that had outshone generations, yet even in death, his presence dominated Versailles. The linens that veiled his still form bore the weight of decades' worth of ceremony and devotion. When the heartbeat of absolute monarchy stilled, France stood on the threshold of transformation, forever shaped by the Sun King's dying breath. Truth 60, spanning 72 unbroken years. Louis XIV's reign eclipses that of any other major European monarch in recorded history. From the moment he first wore the crown at the age of 4 until his final gasp at 76, France's destiny swirled around his will. Wars were waged, palaces erected, and arts flourished under his unwavering hand. Through alliances and intrigue, his longevity became both legend and weapon. Under the rule of Louis XIV, time itself conspired to honour his absolute mandate. Generations of subjects were born, lived, and died within the orbit of his power. their stories subsumed by the monolith of his sovereignty. Truth 61 mourning at Versailles became as regimented as its courtly rituals. On the day following his death, a royal edict forbade all courtiers from washing their hair for 30 days. This extended vigil of unkempt locks served as a visible testament to collective grief, a public display of loyalty that bound every noble in shared sorrow. Hair once powdered and perfumed to perfection was left to gather the dust of tears and candle soot. In this austere ritual, Louis XIV ensured that, even in absence, his will sculpted the behavior of his subjects. No matter how private the loss, the kingdom united in a gesture that proclaimed the sun. King's departure demanded homage as radiant and unwavering as his reign. Truth 62. Even in death, Louis XIV claimed a throne beyond the grave. His heart was embalmed with the same meticulous care he had once lavished on his gardens, then sealed within a crystal urn at the Basilica of Saint-Denis. There, it rested apart from his body, a pulsing symbol of loyalty that outlived flesh. Pilgrims who knelt before this gleaming vessel were reminded that the Sun King's essence, his very lifeblood, remained enshrined in a sacred urn, a testament to the permanence of royal power. By isolating his heart, Louis XIV ensured that his legacy would beat on in crystalline perpetuity. Truth 63. When at last his mortal frame was laid to rest, Louis XIV was interred, clothed in the triumphant vestments of his coronation, the ermine-trimmed robes, the silk gloves, and the polished leather boots that had trod the marble of Versailles for decades. No simple burial shroud would suffice. Instead, he lay encased in the regalia of his apex moment. As though even death could not diminish the spectacle of his investiture, those who gazed upon his tomb beheld a monarch preserved in living colour, forever ready to rise and command. Through this final act of opulence, the Sun King enshrined his crowning glory for eternity. Truth 64. Yet the brilliance of Versailles proved ephemeral without the guiding hand of its architect king. In the decades following Louis XIV's passing, the palace fell into partial neglect. Fountains ran dry, gardens grew wild, and halls once thronged with courtiers echoed with emptiness. Statues weathered in moss, tapestries frayed at the edges, and the Hall of Mirrors dimmed beneath layers of soot. It was only under Louis XV, his great-grandson, that Versailles received a rigorous restoration, its grandeur rekindled through fresh fountains, manicured parterres, and polished marble. The revival underscored one immutable truth: without the Sun King's exacting vision, even the grandest creation risks fading into ruin. Truth 65. 2 centuries later, an upstart emperor named Napoleon Bonaparte turned Versailles into a theatre of diplomacy, hosting foreign dignitaries beneath its gilded ceilings. With every banquet and levee, Napoleon echoed Louis XIV's flair for statecraft. Using Versailles as a stage to project imperial might, ambassadors from across Europe paraded through the same corridors where the Sun King once held court, pledging allegiance and negotiating treaties. In this reinvention, Napoleon paid tribute to Louis XIV's legacy that architecture and ceremony could be wielded as instruments of influence, binding allies and enemies alike to the gravitas of the French state. Truth 66. The mythic grandeur of Versailles did not remain confined within French borders. Inspired by its scale and symmetry, Tsar Peter the Great of Russia commissioned the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, mirroring Versailles' Baroque opulence on the Neva River's banks. Massive halls of gleaming marble, gilded facades, and formal gardens stretched toward the horizon, all echoing the Sun King's template. By replicating Versailles, Peter declared that Russia, too, could rival Western Europe in majesty and power. Thus, Louis XIV's vision transcended language and landscape, shaping the very blueprint of imperial architecture for generations. Truth 67. In 2013, archaeologists working beneath Versailles made a startling discovery: the Sun King's royal gout slippers. preserved beneath palace floorboards. These diminutive velvet shoes, rimmed with gold embroidery and lined in silk, bore traces of medicinal herbs and soft padding, designed to soothe the excruciating pain of gout that plagued his later years. Their unearthing revealed a monarch still vulnerable to mortal afflictions, yet determined to stride through pain with regal poise. The slippers offered a rare, intimate glimpse into Louis XIV's private struggle, a reminder that even the loftiest of thrones rested upon human frailty. Truth 68. Finally, to captivate visiting ambassadors, Louis XIV commissioned a 200-metre-long Galerie des Glaces, the Hall of Mirrors, whose gilded arches and mirrored panels refracted candlelight into infinite rays. Row upon row of glass reflected statues and chandeliers, creating an illusion of limitless space. When ambassadors entered this resplendent gallery, they saw not only themselves, but the majesty of France magnified 100-fold. Each diplomatic visit became a sensory assault, a calculated spectacle that impressed upon every foreign envoy the boundless grandeur of the Sun King's reign. Through this architectural marvel, Louis XIV solidified Versailles as the apogee of absolute monarchy, where mirrors and light conspired to immortalize his sovereign legend. Truth 69 mirrors were not mere conveniences at Versailles, they were weapons of statecraft. Louis XIV ordered vast quantities of glass imported from Venice at enormous expense, effectively breaking the Venetian monopoly on fine mirror production. When these panels arrived, craftsmen installed them in the Galerie des Glaces and other royal chambers, transforming ordinary reflections into statements of French supremacy. Each sheet of glass proclaimed to every visitor that France could outspend and outshine any rival by monopolizing this luxury material. Louis XIV forced Europe to acknowledge that glass, once the zenith of Venetian craftsmanship, now belonged to the Sun King. Truth 70. In a kingdom renowned for artifice and splendor, Louis XIV turned his attention to a less glamorous but equally monumental project, Versailles plumbing. Over the course of many years, he directed the installation of extensive lead piping that channeled water from distant reservoirs into fountains, baths, and even the kitchens. These pipes, laid beneath marble floors and behind frescoed walls, still function today, more than 3 centuries later. Through this feat of engineering, Louis XIV demonstrated that true grandeur must embrace utility. He did not only build palaces for display, but equipped them with infrastructure worthy of his vision. Truth 71. Tobacco smoke, once a novelty imported from the New World, found no quarter in the personal chambers of Louis XIV. He issued an edict banning smoking within his private apartments, declaring that the acrid fumes offended the nose of majesty. Courtiers caught lighting pipes in adjacent rooms, faced immediate reprimand, and chamber pots were emptied at midnight to remove any lingering odour. This prohibition underscored the king's belief that even the simplest sensory offence could undermine the dignity of his person. By controlling the very air around him, Louis XIV reinforced that every element of his environment fell under his exacting command. Truth 72. Knowledge was a treasure as prized as gold in the court of the Sun King. Louis XIV amassed a personal library of over 3,000 volumes, encompassing history, science, and philosophy. These tomes, leather-bound and lettered in gold, occupied entire alcoves within the palace, where the king summoned scholars and thinkers to discuss everything from Euclidean geometry to the nature of government. His library was not a static display, but a working repository. Manuscripts were annotated in the margins, and new works commissioned to expand its holdings. Through this vast collection, Louis XIV proclaimed that intellectual mastery was inseparable from sovereign authority. Truth 73. Arts flourished under the patronage of the Sun King. Louis XIV personally championed playwrights Molière and Racine, as well as composer Jean-Baptiste Lully, shaping the golden age of French classical drama and music. He provided theatres, stages, and musicians at his expense, attending performances with the critical eye of a maestro. When a play missed the mark or an aria fell flat, he demanded rewrites and rehearsals, until the work met his exacting standards. Under his aegis, tragedy and comedy alike reflected the grandeur of Versailles, and courtly music adopted rhythms that echoed the pulse of absolute monarchy. Truth 74. To bind his subjects to the monarchy, Louis XIV elevated the fleur-de-lis to France's official emblem. This stylized lily appeared on coins, banners, and uniforms, a constant reminder of royal sovereignty. Each piece of currency minted under his authority bore the triple fleur-de-lis, proclaiming the sanctity of his lineage. Soldiers embroidered it on their sleeves. Diplomats sealed treaties with it pressed into wax. By transforming a simple botanical symbol into the visual shorthand of power, Louis XIV ensured that no standard, flag, or coin could circulate without acknowledging his dominion. Truth 75. Chivalry found its apex under Louis XIV with the revival of the Ordre du Saint-Esprit, originally established in the year 1578. This highest chivalric order was reinstituted by the Sun King to reward unwavering loyalty and service. Membership was limited to nobles of the most impeccable pedigree, who swore fealty before the king and wore a star-shaped badge of blue enamel and diamonds. Investiture ceremonies were held in the Grand Chapel, where knights pledged to uphold the faith and defend the realm. Through this resurrection of medieval tradition, Louis XIV fused ancient honor with modern absolutism, binding the most illustrious families to his unchallengeable throne. Truth 76. In his relentless quest to extend royal authority even to the horrors of war, Louis XIV's court physicians devised the first standardized ambulance service for battlefield care. Under his directive, brightly painted carts, marked with the royal fleur-de-lis, raced across scarred fields, their wheels greased for speed. Skilled surgeons and surgeons' mates, vetted by Versailles itself, accompanied each convoy, armed with lancets, morphine, and bandages sterilized through heat and vinegar. These flying ambulances, as some called them, they were revolutionary wounded. Soldiers were no longer left to die where they fell. Instead, they were swiftly transported from the carnage to makeshift field hospitals, their lives preserved by a system engineered at the king's behest. Through this medical innovation, Louis XIV demonstrated that his dominion embraced not only conquest, but also the sanctity of his subjects' lives. Truth 77. Even the son, king's vigor was not left to chance. To fortify his body against the rigors of endless ceremony and governance, Louis XIV mandated daily Gasperin baths infused with a potent brew of rosemary, leona, sage, and other invigorating herbs. These aromatic waters were heated to precise temperatures in vast copper cauldrons, then guided into marble tubs beneath the watchful eye of court attendants. As he immersed himself in the steaming concoction, the essence of botanicals filled the air, awakening mind and muscle alike. Courtiers who witnessed this ritual recognized it as a declaration. Vitality was an extension of authority, and only the most rigorous self-care could sustain a monarch destined to outlast his peers. Truth 78. To ensure that his visage penetrated every stratum of French society, Louis XIV ordered his portrait to appear on coins minted throughout his reign, an audacious exercise in mass propaganda long before the era of posters and pamphlets. His profile, hair powdered and coiffed in sun, king's splendor, was stamped into gold, silver, and copper, peasants paying taxes, merchants making change, and soldiers counting pay all handled coins, emblazoned with his imperial countenance. Each transaction, from the marketplace to the royal treasury, became a moment of homage, even in the palm of a serf's hand. The Sun King's face reminded all that their fortunes and obligations revolved around his unyielding will. Truth 79. Appreciating that spectacle could unify a nation, Louis XIV commissioned the first permanent circus building in Paris, dedicated to equestrian shows and acrobatic feats. No longer would itinerant troupes entertain provincial towns. Instead, a grand circular amphitheatre. Its facade adorned with columns and statues rose on the outskirts of the city. Inside, horses pranced in majestic formations. Riders executed daring vaults, and performers tumbled in choreographed harmony. Tickets were distributed at court, guaranteeing that nobles and commoners witnessed the same royal-sponsored marvels. By institutionalizing the circus, Louis XIV harnessed popular entertainment as a tool of cohesion, demonstrating that even the simplest thrills served the grandeur of his realm. Truth, 80. To guard the integrity of his currency essential for funding wars, courts, and public works, Louis XIV established the Bureau of the Mint. This new institution oversaw every aspect of coin production, from assaying precious metals to stamping perfected dies and supervising master engravers. Inspectors roamed each mint, wielding scales and calipers to catch any deviation from prescribed weight or purity. Offenders, minters, or lieutenants received severe penalties, including fines and imprisonment. Through rigorous oversight, the Sun King assured that French coins retained their value and that counterfeiting became a crime against the crown itself. By policing coinage quality, Louis XIV fused economic stability with sovereign authority, proving that control of money was as critical to power as mastery of sword or scepter. Truth, 81. In an unparalleled display of feasting and opulence, Louis XIV once hosted a single dinner comprising 20 courses that spanned a grueling 5 hours. Yet when the last silver-plated tureen was emptied, he ordered more dishes served without hesitation. The banquet table groaned under the weight of roasted swans, gilded peacocks, truffled game, and jewel-like confections. Courtiers, already weakened by indulgence, dared not linger over discomfort. Instead, they summoned reserves of appetite and decorum to honor their sovereign's command. This relentless procession of courses was more than gastronomic excess. It was a calculated demonstration that the Sun King's capacity for abundance and for demanding endurance knew no bounds. Truth, 82. To transform dessert into a marvel of spectacle, Louis XIV's premier chef sculpted an edible replica of Versailles entirely from sugar. At one legendary banquet, guests entered to behold miniature marble columns, mirrored halls, and even tiny fountains, all painstakingly molded from spun sugar and candied almonds. The sculpture glimmered under torchlight, its crystalline towers refracting candle beams like the real palace's hall of mirrors. When the host declared the masterpiece open for sampling, courtiers approached with reverence, nibbling sections as though dismantling the Sun King's dominion itself. In this daring confection, Louis XIV fused architecture, artistry, and indulgence, asserting that his influence extended to every material and every morsel within his realm. Truth, 83 Street Theatre, once a vital vein of popular culture, to met the Sun King's iron will when he outlawed all performances without a royal license. Vagabond troops that once roamed market squares now faced fines, imprisonment, or expulsion if they dared stage a comedy or tragedy without Versailles' seal of approval. This decree crushed spontaneous popular expression, forcing playwrights and actors into the orbit of court patronage or silence. By monopolizing theatrical license, Louis XIV transformed performance into another regulated aspect of loyalty, ensuring that every spoken line and enacted drama reflected and never contradicted the narrative he dictated from his gilded throne. Truth, 84. Even the grandeur of Versailles yielded to the Sun King's desire for refuge. He commissioned private gardens at the Grand Trianon, and Versailles Pavilion tucked amid weeping willows and rose arbors, where he could retreat from the ceaseless intrigues of court life. These secluded grounds, laid out in intimate parterres and lined with whispering hedges, offered a controlled sanctuary where the king could stroll in silence, conferring only with the most trusted confidants. In cultivating this hidden Eden, Louis XIV acknowledged that absolute power weighed heavily upon him, and that even a monarch required a haven shielded from the razor-sharp social machinations he himself had orchestrated. Truth 85. To reward familial loyalty and secure alliances, Louis XIV erected the Petit Trianon for his beloved sister-in-law, Marie Adélaïde. This petite neoclassical villa, its pale stone facades framed by climbing roses, stood apart from the sprawling formality of Versailles. Within its salon and private chambers, Marie Adélaïde presided over intimate gatherings, shielded from the pomp and peril of the main court. By commissioning this personal retreat, the Sun King wielded architecture as a tool of favour, ensuring that those closest to him received privileges unseen by the broader nobility. The Petit Trianon thus became a symbol proximity to royalty, conferred exquisite benefits, but only for the chosen few. Truth 86. Even in matters of faith, Louis XIV's passions intertwined with his personal relationships. Under cover of darkness, he held clandestine midnight masses at the Grand Trianon Chapel in honour of his first mistress. These secret services, illuminated by flickering votive candles and attended by a handful of confidants, blended devotion with desire, sanctifying a liaison that court protocol would never publicly acknowledge. In the hush of pre-dawn prayers, the Sun King sought spiritual absolution for his earthly passions. Merging the sacred and the profane under vaulted ceilings, this hidden ritual revealed that even his faith served the Sun King's will, sanctifying conspiracies of the heart in the very shadows of his palace. Truth 87. Under the Sun King's vigilant eye, not even Versailles' canine population escaped regulation. Louis XIV decreed that every dog residing on palace grounds be officially registered and vaccinated, a pioneering move in public health. Royal clerks maintained detailed ledgers, noting each animal's breed, colour, and inoculation date. Nobles who failed to present their spaniels or poodles for vaccination faced fines and the removal of their pets from court privileges. By extending his authority to the realm of animal care, Louis XIV demonstrated that no subject, human or hound, was exempt from the crown's exacting standards. His mandate prefigured modern veterinary practice, binding every living creature in his domain to the discipline of royal decree. Truth 80. 8 state banquets under Louis XIV became feats of logistical mastery when he instituted dinners of 40 distinct courses on official occasions. These epic feasts unfolded over hours, with each course arriving on silver platters, polished to a mirror sheen. Courtiers shifted through tiers of oysters and consommes, poultry and venison, elaborate fish preparations and glistening pastries, each dish more sumptuous than the last. Master of ceremonies timed every arrival to the tick of a gilded clock, ensuring that tables remained brimming with opulence. From first course to 40th, the spectacle was relentless, even as guests excused themselves for brief respite. Servants stood ready to wheel in the next course. By orchestrating these exhaustive banquets, Louis XIV displayed that statecraft could be conducted at the intersection of abundance and endurance, leaving participants awed by his capacity for extravagance. Truth 89. Displaying his penchant for lavish indulgence, Louis XIV once commissioned a single jewelled snuff box, costing over 100,000 livres, crafted by the finest goldsmiths and encrusted with diamonds, rubies, and emeralds. The box was small enough to fit in a gentleman's pocket, yet vast in its ostentation. When it arrived at Versailles, courtiers gasped at its weight and sparkle. Each jewel caught the candlelight like a captive star. The Sun King used this treasure not merely for personal pleasure, but as diplomatic currency, gifting it to loyal ambassadors to secure unwavering fealty. By spending such a staggering sum on a personal accessory, Louis XIV asserted that wealth itself was a tool of power, capable of dazzling and subduing any recipient. Truth 90. In a move that startled foreign observers, Louis XIV banned forks at court, permitting only spoons and knives at the royal table. He declared that the fork was an affectation borrowed from Italy, unworthy of Versailles' refined traditions. Courtiers accustomed to spearing morsels now mastered the art of slicing with knives and scooping with spoons, all while maintaining the precise decorum demanded by protocol. Etiquette manuals were updated overnight to reflect the ban, and imported silver forks were melted down into royal medals. Through this prohibition, Louis XIV wielded utensil policy as a test of obedience, reinforcing that even the smallest domestic detail adhered to his sovereign whim. Truth 91. Despite his mastery of style and ceremony, the Sun, King could not conquer the limitations of his own body. Chronic dental problems plagued Louis XIV from youth, resulting in persistent halitosis that no amount of mint or vinegar could fully mask. To compensate, courtiers carried perfumed pomanders, small spherical containers filled with scented powders, eager to offer them discreetly when the monarch leaned in for conversation. This strange ritual transformed personal breath into a matter of court etiquette. To fail to prod a desperate guest with a pomander was to risk an interpersonal affront through his unvanquished struggle with bad breath. Louis XIV demonstrated that even the loftiest throne could not transcend the mortal frailties of flesh, and that his subjects would adapt their own airs to serve the sun. King's comfort. Truth 92. In a sovereign assertion of communicative might, Louis XIV commissioned Versailles' first printing press solely for the production of royal decrees. No longer did proclamations trickle through hand-copied manuscripts subject to delay or error. Instead, freshly minted pamphlets rolled off the press in hundreds, each bearing the embossed fleur-de-lis and the king's signature cipher. Ambassadors, magistrates, and parish priests alike received these printed orders at the same moment, ensuring that his will rippled through every province with unwavering precision. By monopolizing print technology, Louis XIV transformed the humble press into a tool of absolute command, stamping his authority into the very fabric of France's burgeoning literate society. Truth 93. In an unprecedented display of sartorial sovereignty, Louis XIV instituted a court fashion week, a lavish parade of upcoming royal attire that set the tone for European style. Courtiers gathered in the Hall of Mirrors to witness models draped in velvet coats embroidered with gold thread, satin waistcoats studded with pearls, and silken breeches cut to the exact length decreed by the king's tailors. Tailors from Lyon to Paris vied for premieres at Versailles, hoping to secure royal patronage and influence an entire continent's wardrobes. Under his command, clothing ceased to be mere utility and became a statement of loyalty, every stitch and silhouette broadcasting the sun. King's aesthetic decree to every crowned head in Christendom. Truth 94. Each year, on the dawn of his birthday, Louis XIV transformed Versailles' skies into a tapestry of flame and thunder with fireworks that blazed from sunrise until dusk. Artificers crafted rockets in shapes of fleur-de-lis, suns, and crowns, launching them over the Grand Canal in a synchronized spectacle that echoed the palace's mirrored facades. Day-long displays required thousands of pounds of powder and intricate timing, yet the expense mattered little. Each explosion served as both celebration and declaration. In the roar and glow of combusting lacquer and iron, courtiers and peasants alike were reminded that the sun, King's dominion, stretched from earth to heavens, and that on his natal day, the very sky belonged to him. Truth 95. Driven by an insatiable desire to expand his realm, Louis XIV waged 6 major wars: the War of Devolution, the Franco-Dutch War, the War of the Grand Alliance, the War of the Reunions, the War of Spanish Succession, and various lesser conflicts. Armies under his banner marched across Europe, banners snapping in every theatre from the Low Countries to the Rhine. Generals reported victories and defeats in Versailles' newly minted decrees, and the king's appetite for conquest shaped diplomatic alliances and rivalries for decades. Though these wars bled France's coffers, each campaign bore the sun, King's mark: relentless, strategic, and always aimed at reinforcing the myth of an unassailable sovereign. Truth 96. Astonishingly, even as cannons roared and battlefields smouldered, Louis XIV's reign saw an extraordinary flourishing of French art and architecture. Under his patronage, Parisian ateliers produced gilded furniture. Sculptors carved marble statues for public squares. And architects like Jules Hardouin-Mansart erected monumental facades at Versailles. Painters such as Charles Lebrun adorned ceilings with allegories of Louis's triumphs, while composers like Jean-Baptiste Lully crafted operas that echoed his political narratives. In every medium, the king's vision manifested war and peace alike, fueled a golden age, cementing France's reputation as the cultural heart of Europe. Even as its armies marched on foreign soil, truth. 97. Above every arch and within every decree. Louis XIV bore his personal motto, Nec pluribus impar, not unequal to many sons. This bold assertion rejected any rival luminary, proclaiming the sun, king's supremacy over all others. Whether engraved on the hilt of his sword, painted on carriage panels, or whispered in the corridors of power, this phrase encapsulated his unyielding belief that no constellation of monarchs could rival his radiance. Through wars, ceremonies, and cultural triumphs, Louis XIV embodied this creed, ensuring that his reign blazed at the center of Europe's firmament alone, unrivaled and forever luminous. Truth. 98. Even in casual conversation, Louis XIV wielded poetry as a blade of intellect. He frequently quoted classical poets Virgil, Horace, and Ovid with perfect diction, sprinkling Latin hexameters into his dialogues to project erudition. Courtiers unversed in ancient verse strained to grasp his references, nodding in awed silence as he recited lines on fate and empire. This cultivated fluency served a purpose beyond display by intertwining his speech with the voices of antiquity. The Sun King positioned himself as heir to history's greatest minds, asserting that his reign belonged not merely to the present, but to the vast continuum of Western civilization. Truth. 99. Behind the tapestry of court pageantry lay a ledger of secrets written in cipher. Louis XIV maintained a private diary, encoded in substitutions and symbols, chronicling every whispered scandal, every forbidden romance, and every act of treachery at Versailles, inked in the quiet hours before dawn. These entries laid bare rivalries among princes, illicit liaisons of ladies-in-waiting, and the ambitions of ministers scheming for favour. Should any traitor seize this journal, the king's cryptographic safeguard ensured its contents remained unreadable. By recording the court's darkest intrigues in code, Louis XIV preserved both his memory and his leverage over those who served and those who conspired. Truth. 100 time. And excess exacted a toll, even on the Sun King. In his later years, Louis XIV grew corpulent and gout-ridden, his once supple stride now hampered by swollen joints. Yet he would not yield command to infirmity. Clad in embroidered coats cut to accommodate his ample frame, he insisted on leading parades through Versailles and Paris, riding in gilded carriages, festooned with royal livery. Courtiers who expected to escort him at arm's length instead struggled to match his pace. His stubborn presence amid the pageantry declared unequivocally that neither illness nor obesity could diminish the aura of his sovereignty. Truth. 101 centuries after his corpse was carried from Versailles to Saint-Denis, Louis XIV's legacy radiates outward, immortal as the emblem he bore. His influence endures in the sweeping lines of Baroque palaces around the globe. From Potsdam's palatial gardens to Vienna's great avenues, French remains the language of diplomacy and haute couture, spoken in salons and boardrooms alike. The very concept of absolute monarchy, centralized power vested in one sovereign, owes its classical definition to his peerless reign. Through every stroke of paint, every diplomatic protocol, and every echo of the motto Nec pluribus impar, the Sun King's spirit persists, a blazing testament to the transformative force of one man's unrelenting will. As we draw the curtain on our exploration of 101 shocking and weird truths about Louis XIV, it's time to reckon with the value and messages this video delivers. First, You've witnessed how one man's vision reshaped an entire nation, from the mirrored halls of Versailles to the printed pages of the Gazette de France. From fireworks that lit the sky at dawn to legal edicts that criminalized forks and regulated even the palace dogs, you've seen how Louis XIV wielded extravagance, innovation, and sheer will to cement his image as the sun. King and absolute monarch whose authority touched every aspect of life, from court etiquette to battlefield medicine. But beyond the spectacle, this video invites you to ask a crucial question: which of these truths reflect genuine history, and which drift into the realm of rumor or exaggeration? Was it real that he shattered every mirror to guard state secrets? Did he truly ban forks at court, or might some anecdotes like the coded diary of scandals or the midnight mass for a mistress be embellishments passed down by storytellers hungry for drama? Scroll down and tell us which facts struck you as unquestionably true, and which seem more like tall tales or even deliberate defamation. Your perspectives will help us separate the sovereign's documented legacy from the legends that grew around him. Most importantly, what do we learn from Louis XIV's reign? We learn that absolute power can produce astonishing feats, architecture that defines eras, cultural renaissances that influence centuries, and administrative innovations that prefigure modern institutions. We see how consolidating authority can spur efficiency, from standardized ambulance services to regulatory oversight of currency, but also how it can degenerate into micromanagement controlling courtiers' hair, breath, and even pet vaccinations. His life teaches us that ambition and vision, untempered by accountability, can exact a heavy toll. Endless wars that drained treasuries, lavish expenditures that strained subjects, and a personal grandeur that could obscure the human frailties beneath. Yet there is inspiration as well. By patronizing science, the arts, and public health measures, Louis XIV demonstrated that rulers can and perhaps must use their power to advance knowledge, culture, and welfare. His commissioning of gardens, theatres, and educational academies reminds us that leadership includes leaving behind more than monuments to self. It includes fostering the growth of civilization itself. So, as you reflect on these 101 truths, consider the dual legacy of the sun, king, the brilliance of his achievements, and the shadows cast by his excesses. Share your verdict in the comments. What resonates as fact? What feels like fiction? And what lessons will you carry forward? Whether you see Louis XIV as a visionary architect of modern statecraft, or as the embodiment of unchecked absolutism, his story challenges us to weigh power against responsibility, to marvel at the heights of human creativity, even as we guard against its potential for overreach. Thank you for joining this journey into history's most dazzling and most instructive monarch.